you think about it, I mean, just in the last 100 years is where it's changed, because before that, I think generations were spending time together on the farm or doing things together, whereas our generation is the one that's more fragmented. So I think we have to be more intentional. So I'm always encouraging people, find your Paul, find your Barnabas, find your Timothy. Your Barnabas is your peer that you're working together, you're encouraging each other, you're helping each other. Your Paul is somebody you look to mentor you, and your Timothy is somebody you're mentoring. And we can all do that no matter what stage we are. And so you have to be intentional about finding those people.
Ladies and gentlemen, Merry Christmas. Welcome back to the Present Fathers Podcast. Our guest today is a very close personal mentor to Dustin, Mr. Mark Ragsdale. Mark, Merry Christmas. Welcome to the podcast. How are you, brother?
Merry Christmas, guys. I just love the festive atmosphere we got going here.
Yeah, for those listening, we are all wearing our best ugly sweaters and our Christmas hats, and here we go. We're going to get into a wonderful episode. So, Mark, I'm actually going to pass it over to Dustin now, and I'll let him kind of walk you through to kick things off.
Excellent. So, Mark, you are the pastor at Church at Viera. How many years have you been a pastor there now again?
It will be 33 years in March. Started the church in 1992.
That's an incredible tenure. Wow. So I've just been there a couple years. I'm relatively new to the flock, and I've just been really impressed with everything. The amount of work that you do for the local community to help everyone around has just really impressed me. And every week that I come in, I'm inspired and I feel closer to God because of the speeches that you have. The baptisms are absolutely beautiful. I try not to cry, and I leave in tears every single time. You guys kill me with the baptisms. They're just beautiful. So it's a wonderful, very welcoming community. And I think this would have been 3 weeks ago. Your sermon was about bringing a friend into the church. So we have this opportunity, right? January 1st is our opportunity to get back into the gym and get back in shape. And December 25th is our big chance to get our friends who haven't known Jesus as well back into the church. So let's kick right off with that a little bit. How do we get our friends in a non-combative way? We don't want to make them uncomfortable or even less likely to come to church. What's your playbook to help us bring our friends into church for Christmas?
Well, I know we're from different places, but in Florida, what I've noticed is January is a great time for people to bring their families either back to church or maybe even give it a shot. So as we think about the new year, it really starts with building friendships and just really trying to find time to just connect with people and really show them you care. That's really where it starts, and you just kind of start being intentional about throwing in every once in a while that you go to church or something about God, whether you do it in a humorous way or you talk about something at church and they know you're going to church. And then hopefully through building that relationship and throwing it in, they might ask you some questions about it. That's what you're hoping. And then you just come up with some good questions that you might ask them.
I like it. So you kind of open it up, a little bit of an icebreaker, and then what's the next step there? You've noticed some interest. They said, oh, you go to church. What church do you go to? What's the next step there to get them to actually come and join you?
Well, obviously by that time you've built a friendship with them, so you kind of know what some of their needs are. Maybe they're struggling in their marriage a little bit, or they could use some marriage enrichment, or maybe their kids are having some problems, and then you just kind of say, you know what? Our church has a great youth program or student program or kids program. Or we have this class coming up, like our church has a class coming up in February on marriage and how to improve your marriage. We all need that. So why don't you come join it with me? So invitational is a great way to start. A lot of times just trying to see if they'll come with you and you bring them with you. But hopefully, you're hoping it's going to lead to that point where they really do want to ask some spiritual questions, or you can turn the conversation towards spiritual things and really get into it.
I love it. And it was really through my son. That's how you guys got me. The youth programs are fantastic. And he's excited. He's drawing pictures of Jesus. He's learning about this kind of stuff, and it's wonderful. So as far as what makes a good church versus what makes less of a good church, you've talked a lot about that. Can you break down maybe a couple things that makes a really good church, and then a couple things that maybe to steer away from that you think, some of those churches have gotten away from some of the good things?
Well, personally, I think what makes a good church, first of all, is that you're true to God's word, which we call the Bible. and that you're not trying to tell people what you think or what you believe. You're trying to tell people what God has already said, and you're trying to explain it to them in a way that they can understand it. So it's one of the greatest compliments we get at our church is that, hey, man, when you guys are up there and you're speaking, I can understand what you're saying, and it's very relevant to my life. And if you do the Bible the right way, it is. You don't have to make it that way. It just is. So I think that's where it starts. Personally, we come from a church that we try to marry grace and truth and love really well, because what I found is some churches are getting soft. They don't want to talk about the truth. They don't want to talk about the hard stuff. They just want to love people. But you know what? What I've discovered is the unbeliever, they want you to be honest with them. They don't want you to kind of bait and switch them. So shoot straight with them. Tell them what you believe. Tell them what you think the Bible says. Again, at the appropriate time. But I think you got to marry truth and grace well, and always with love.
If we could actually talk about that a little bit further, that because that's something we have addressed kind of in passing on this show over the years, but we haven't actually sat down with a full-blown pastor and had this kind of conversation. And in many regards, I actually have heard from unbelievers that is one of their biggest gripes about Christians is kind of that wishy-washiness and things like that. So, what do you think is kind of the cause of that, and what do we as just community members, whatever church we go to, kind of ensure that we don't really let our church steer in that direction? In terms of what you just addressed, where it's like, not really preaching the word and honoring what God commanded, right? Sometimes that's pretty firm.
Right. I don't think people are looking for a pep rally. I mean, I think if they finally make it to church, because that's a hard hurdle sometimes to get over anyway, they're just wanting you to tell them what you really think and what you really believe and be honest about it. And then be respectful that you say, hey, think about it, look at it yourself, but just go there. I mean, I think they do respect that. I think you're exactly right, George. They respect that kind of attitude, and that's just the way we are. But you got to do it again with, hey, we all were where you are, asking questions, maybe doubting, and needing grace. And so we've all been where you are. We're not above you. We're not better than you. I think that also speaks to them, where they see people who are not trying to be better than them.
Yeah, I think that's a real, it's just that transparency and just being real, right? Because it's kind of the whole keeping up with the Joneses stuff, right? People can start to see through that pretty fast, and just being genuine about things is definitely, not just for church in general. That's kind of the way I live my life. Is Brandon coined the phrase "courageously transparent," and I think that's just so brilliant, such a great way to kind of model the community. And yeah, so I don't really have any follow up to that. I appreciate you kind of helping clarify that, because, like I said, we've addressed that a lot of times, but not from an actual pastor. So thanks for weighing in on that one.
So, Mark, what is special about Christmas for the church? Right, we go to church 52 weeks out of the year. What is unique and special about today, about Christmas? We have 5 that'll be going on right today. What's so special and exciting about today for church specifically?
Well, obviously, it's the Super Bowl day of the year when we really get to understand why Jesus came, why he really came to earth as a human being, which is huge. I mean, no other religion or philosophy talks about God coming as a human being. So we get to talk about, hey, wouldn't you want to serve and love a God who would do that, who would have the courage to come as a human being and be punished and suffer for you? I mean, what other God would you want to serve than that? Obviously, that's the biggest thing, but it is a time when people are open to hearing the gospel and at least coming to church. And they may be coming because their family, wants them to come or whatever, but it gives us a hearing with them at this time of year for us to be able to share the good news.
Yeah, I agree. So what's the next step for a new church member? I'm relatively new to the church. I was out of the flock for probably 10 or 15 years. And I like to tell these guys, it was the moment that I looked into my son's eyes when he was first born that I saw God and I started to believe again. It was one of those beautiful moments where I didn't necessarily want to believe, but I had to, right? It was one of those beautiful things where I was very lucky that Jesus spoke to me directly, in that regard. For people who don't have that really special moment where they say, wow, this is real, I have no choice but to believe, what's that next step? They go to church on Christmas, and then how do they get to where they start to take more of an intellectual walk with Jesus?
Yes. I don't know again about your churches, but our church, we always try to intentionally do a series right after Christmas starting off the new year, to really talk about discipleship, what that really means. Of course, we got to break that down because the unbeliever doesn't know what discipleship is, but how do you really follow Jesus? How do you get to know him better? So we're doing a series, 6-week series on spiritual disciplines of learning how to pray and talk to God and get alone with God, how to study your Bible, hear from him. How do you, just develop that walk with God. So I think it's important to be in a group to do that. So one of the things we really emphasize is, hey, come alongside some other people and let them help you grow. And that being part of a group is huge for us. And then what I've noticed is the people who actually serve in some way, whether it's on our security team or greeting people, even if it's a simple task, those are the people who grow the most because they're involved and they're engaged.
Nice. Yeah, I was going to ask, so I saw a video that was pretty popular on YouTube, I want to say 2 or 3 years ago, and it was talking about essentially Christ was not a fan of the church. And there was people who were saying, it was kind of a big movement because a lot of folks felt like either they just couldn't find the right church or the churches they'd been to, they had bad experiences at. What would you suggest for those who are trying to find a church who may feel that way or think that way, or who doesn't have any clue about Christ and is just looking and searching to try to find, their home, so to speak?
Well, obviously what we're hoping is that they've already met a Christian who's alive and real and honest and things we've been talking about, and that's their introduction. But if it's not, we live in a world where you can check churches online out, first of all, if you want to, and see what they're about, see what vibe they're giving. And so you can check out churches online before you even attend. And our church does that, has an online live service, that kind of stuff. But I really do think it starts with people that that seem to be on the right pathway and then joining them in a church. And I'm hoping that's where it's going to start. Otherwise, you are kind of sometimes in the dark going place to place, trying to find the right place. I think it's harder to do that, but you can find it.
Yeah, I agree. I personally, the way I see it is like if I want to truly be somebody who draws somebody near to Christ, I have to be the person that has so much joy and my life is just so special. Like there's something different, but they can't put their finger on it. And then they ask, why are you this way, man? Like, why are you so happy? Why are you always doing this? Why you give the shirt off your back, to people? Why would you do that? Like, why are you nice to people who are treating you wrong? Well, let me tell you about my God, right? Let me tell you about my Jesus. And, you get to give them the best example of that. And, I think that's a really vital, important thing for a solo Christian. Now, as far as churches are concerned, it's definitely a different approach, right? Because I think you guys have, first of all, you have to foster a sense of community, right? But then you also have core missions based on what denomination you are and those kind of things. So one question I did want to ask you was, what do you believe like the core mission of the church is in today's society? And like, how can we communicate this effectively to those who have like maybe never been to church or who have left the church?
Well, every church should have its own mission statement or vision statements, just like a business should, right? We see Apple, we see big business like Microsoft. We know kind of what their mission is by their statements. And ours is, we want to be a place of grace where Christ changes lives. We want to be a place of grace where Christ is the one who changes lives. In other words, people see that. But it starts with us being a people of grace. So I really do think our mission is to represent Christ well by sharing truth and grace in love, hoping, again, that Christ can get into our life because he's the one that can change them. We can't. So that's my hope, that every church is hoping to point people to Jesus Christ and let him change them instead of them trying to do it themselves.
We interrupt this episode to talk about Synthesis Tutor, the world's first superhuman math tutor. It is warm, patient, and understanding, and adapts to your child so you never have to worry about them falling behind when it comes to math. In episode 84, we spoke to Chrisman Frank, the CEO of Synthesis, and immediately afterwards, I purchased Synthesis Tutor for my daughter, and it has been an absolute game changer for us. Math used to be a very painful experience. It was frustrating, and there was lots of tears for my daughter when it came to learning math. It's something she's not naturally good at, and we struggled a lot. Now she happily uses Synthesis Tutor every single week, and there's no more frustrating nights. The way it works is that it leverages AI to adapt the experience to your child to not simply master memorization of math facts, but it actually teaches the principles and concepts so that your child can independently solve problems without needing tons of outside help. Because it tailors the experience to your child, it is always adapting and learning where the child is in terms of their development, and it keeps them in the proximal zone of learning so that your child is being challenged but not getting frustrated or defeated by the experience. I am very pleased with our experience on Synthesis Tutor. My daughter's grades have improved in math. It's something that I can now outsource. I don't have to take the time myself to sit there and try and memorize facts with her. She gets excited to do it, and it's fun and engaging for her to learn instead of this frustrating experience, and it doesn't feel like a chore any longer. So we at the Present Fathers podcast highly endorse Synthesis Tutor. There is also a Teams function for those with multiple kids or maybe multiple families want to pool their children together. You can check that out on the website. You can get 10% off with your purchase by going to synthesis.com/PFP. That's synthesis.com/PFP. Go there, check it out, and start supercharging your child's learning experience with the power of AI. Back to the episode.
Amen. So, Mark, the Church of Viera has been growing rapidly over the past couple of years, is my understanding. It feels like there's a bit of a spiritual awakening in America. It's exciting to see. Why do you think that is? Why do you think so many people are suddenly flocking back to the church again after so many years of church attendance dropping so precipitously over the past 20 years?
Well, it's interesting. I think we all know when COVID hit and a lot of churches were shut down, a lot of churches struggled not only during COVID, but after COVID. I heard stats whereas almost some were having 60%, of what they had before COVID. Our church didn't experience that for some reason. We just didn't experience that. And I really do believe it's because what I've just said. We've been known in our community of being very active in the community, showing love, giving grace, sharing the truth, being active, building right relationships, and being uncompromising in our convictions. And what I discovered is a lot of the conservatives kind of have wakened up in recent years, realizing where our country and where our world is going. And so they're awakened more, and they're looking for a church that's going to help them. But also, I think the world out of COVID realizes, hey, we've got some problems, and I don't have all the answers. And so they're starting to look spiritually of finding those answers, I think, and the church should be the place that welcomes them well.
Yeah, I had a mentor really talk to me about that. How, the devil overplays his hand. He's not perfect, right? He's powerful. He's got a lot of ability, but he's not perfect, right? And I really think the 2020 to 2022 period was really that happening, right? He played too many cards, laid it out too much, and I think it woke a lot of people up to, well, I don't like that. I don't know if I know what the answer is yet, but I want to go start finding out. And so my question actually dovetails off of that a little bit, where I'm a veteran. I've got a lot of friends who've seen quite a bit, and then I've got other friends who just not necessarily from a veteran point of view, but have been through some really horrible things. And I've heard the statement several times that how could a loving God let something like that happen, right? So they're almost hung up on believing or pursuing it because not necessarily they're antagonistic to it, but just they can't really intellectually grapple with how could God let these horrible things happen, right? Whether it's in combat or abuse or something like that. So, I'm sure you've heard this plenty too. And I would just love for you to be able to speak to that one, because I'm sure there's someone listening right now who may be in the same boat.
Well, Dustin knows this, but my wife had a stroke 2.5 years ago. And let me just quickly tell you how that came about. She got COVID. She had the vaccine. She had COVID, and we both had COVID. And 2 weeks after that, she throws a clot, blood clot, and gets a stroke, which we think was directly related to COVID, possibly the vaccine. But so we've been dealing with that for 2.5 years. And somebody might look at my life and say, hey, you're a pastor. Why in the world would God allow this to happen to you? You're serving God, all the things you're having to deal with and caring for your wife and all that. But I don't look at it that way. I look at it why I wasn't saying why God when all these good things were happening to me. Why would I say why God when the bad things were happening to me? But to answer your question, I would say you always take them back to God. Look at what He allowed His Son to go through, to be persecuted, to be hung on a cross, to die. Look what he allowed him to go through so that he could defeat evil someday. And that's the kind of God I want to trust, one who's willing to go through it for me. And then he will help me eventually overcome evil and suffering and all those things. But in this world, we are going to have that. But he's overcome the world.
Yeah, and it's if I understand it correctly, it's that, currently, he has essentially left dominion of this earth currently to Satan, right? And so evil does have a presence here, and to be honest, those things aren't being done by God. They're being done by evil people, and full of hate and malice in their hearts, and that's really unfortunate that that's happening. But just if you could pull the thread on that a little bit more, of how there's kind of still just this concept of just because we believe, or just because there is good, there is still evil, and we're not spared from hardship simply because of one thing or the other, right? That's just not the world we live in.
I hope you guys can all go back and watch Church of Viera's Christmas Eve service, because actually I'm attacking this and that service because I really am speaking to the unbeliever. And I'm going to give you the quick synopsis, okay? There's three things that we all believe in, whether we're Christians or unbelievers, okay? There's evil in the world that we have to solve. There's an evil force in the world that we have to solve, and it's on the outside, okay? There's an evil on the inside of each one of us that we have to deal with. We all can see that in ourselves. There are times we do wrong, we hurt people, all those kind of things. We call that sin, but we all can see the evil inside of us that comes out sometimes. We need to answer for that. And then death is coming for all of us, okay? The greatest darkness of all is death, and that's coming for all of us. We need to answer for that. Well, Jesus Christ is the only one who can be the light to overcome all three of those problems that we all will face. And one of them is evil. And he is going to conquer it one day, but he's holding off to coming back because he wants as many people to be able to come in the door in faith to him, in his family, because once that door's shut and evil is dealt with, there's no one else coming in. So he's coming, but it is still here that we're going to have to deal with.
Yeah. And, when I have friends come to me that are not believers and they say, life's just so unfair, how can there be a God? And I just tell them, I thank God that life's not fair, because if life was fair, I'd be hanging on a cross right now.
Absolutely. We don't want fairness, do we?
No. So.
Jeez, how do I go
Brandon's
after
just
that?
going to casually drop the mic on that one.
Yeah.
Conversation
Good
over.
gosh.
Yeah. The other real quick thing, Justin, sorry,
go
last
ahead.
little point too, is it's also, there would be no free will, right? If God was just going to preempt all wrongdoing now, we wouldn't have free will, quite frankly.
Exactly.
And
if he got rid of evil all right now, guess what? We all have a little evil inside of us. We all would be obliterated. So he's being
there you
patient.
go. There's that too, yeah.
He's being patient with all of us.
Yeah.
Obviously, now if you have Jesus, you have an answer for that. You can be forgiven for that. If you don't have Jesus, you don't have an answer for that, and you're going to have to face it someday.
Yeah. I so much more am a visual learner and a kinesthetic learner. So I enjoyed The Chosen more so, and I don't blasphemous me, or don't consider this blasphemy. Excuse me, can't speak tonight. I don't like reading the Bible as much as I do like watching or hearing it, if that makes sense. And so there's an episode called 2 by 2, and it talks about little James, and he comes to Jesus and he says, "Why haven't you healed me?" And obviously he's the one with a lame leg. And he says, the Father could will it right now, and you'd have a great story. He goes, "But what would your story be if you didn't and you have the ability to heal?" And he talks about how God has a plan for everybody and a reason for everything. And what people need to realize is they're not omnipotent. I can't speak to that tonight, sorry. But they seem to, I guess just society as a whole has started to think like we know all the answers, and if we don't, we can find them. No, there's some things that you will never know the answer to, and you need to understand that God has a path for everything in your life and for a reason. Because, let's say you get your arm knocked off, it could save your life, and instead of being dead, 2 weeks from now, you get in a car accident or something else happens. There's always a ripple effect that could happen that you have no clue about. So people just need to understand that there's always going to be, a reason behind everything, whether it sucks or whether it's good. And then to Brandon's point, the things that are good in life are good because there are bad things. if we didn't have the bad things in life, we wouldn't appreciate the great moments, and they wouldn't feel so extraordinary to us. So, sorry, I can't speak tonight, but yeah, that's it.
That's great points, Justin. And I love it how you said about little James, because yeah, we all want the miracle, and sometimes the miracle happens for us or others, and we need to celebrate that and give God glory. But I always say the greatest faith is those that the miracle doesn't come, and yet they still praise God and trust God, and people are looking at you like, how could you do that? And to me, that's the greatest faith of all that's going to draw people to Him, because we all know sometimes it doesn't happen.
We had a great conversation with Nolan Arbaugh. He's the first Neuralink recipient, and he wrestled with God for years after he lost the ability to walk. He's quadriplegic, and he begged and prayed, God, please heal me. I want to be able to walk again. And then this opportunity came where he can now have more that he can do, right, with his Neuralink. He's able to inspire people and let them know about God. And he didn't want it at first. He said, God, I don't want people to see me like this. I'm in a chair. I'm embarrassed. I don't want to be a public figure while I'm not whole. Can you please just heal me? And God said, it's not going to be that easy for you. I'm going to let you do my work, but it's not going to be how you want it. And it was just such a beautiful story how he says that it was never what he asked for, because he was praying for selfish things, but his prayers were answered just in a different way than he expected. And so I think he's really going to be a powerful voice, largely because he wasn't healed in the way that he asked for, but he still has this opportunity to do something really important.
Yes, one of my best friends is in our church named Gary Miracle. He lost all 4 of his limbs, both his arms, both his legs, through something that happened in the hospital. And yet now he has a bigger platform for God than ever before because of this. So he's using it and not blaming God, but trusting God through it. That's what we need to do. Whatever comes our way is point people to God through it.
Yeah, I wanted to point something else about it, Nolan. So he does have a platform now because of the path he was put on, and being in Neuralink, and it also blessed him and his family recently because he had somebody had given him an idea to try to help him financially because his home was just not built around what he needs to kind of have a day-to-day operation and a good workflow. And a lot of people in the X community and everywhere else jumped in and have helped this man and his family just exponentially. Like it's unreal the amount that was given to him. So he got extremely blessed and helped in a way that was just beautiful. And it turned out that we actually talked about it on the podcast with him. He talked about financial struggles and how he didn't want to be that to other people. And now there's no way he's going to be that. God literally answered what he talked about on the podcast. So I just thought that was kind of cool. It came full circle.
Well, I think there's, the Psalms talk about, the word and God is the lamp unto my feet, right? And so when I think of that visualization, God is only showing us the next few steps. Because if we were to look ahead and see what God is really preparing us for, that's maybe 10, 15 feet away, we'd be terrified. But God builds us up one step at a time, and that's intentional. Sometimes we have to go through persecution or trials to be ready for the things that we need to face, ahead of time. We have to have that kind of strength. And so God is going to garner us with that strength. How does he do that? Yeah. Well, we don't pray for patience because Lord, he's going to give it to you. He's going to give it to you in ways you don't expect, I remember praying about God seeking my heart and correcting things that were not right. And 2 days later, I got COVID and almost died from it. But, praise God, I got through it. But at the same time, I went through a trial, but I'm telling you, I've never been more on fire for the Lord after that point. So there are things where, just like when a blacksmith crafts a hammer or a sword, it has to go under the iron and it has to go into the fire. And it comes out way stronger and it comes out prepared for whatever battle that it needs to be ready for. And so I think that's the same thing for us. And, obviously he gives us an insurmountable amount of grace and love, and he has his protective hand over us. But at that time, no discipline is good at time of occurring, right? And it's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of us, especially when, pride and, modern day theology and all these different things come into play. So.
And iron sharpens iron, right? So that blacksmith hammering alone doesn't work as well as when we have a brotherhood that's able to make us stronger all together. So I'm so glad that I have you brothers who have brought me closer to God and have made me a better man. So thank you all. So Mark, speaking of a brotherhood, you have a lot of your family working in the church with you, right? Your son and a few other people. Talk to me a little bit about legacy and what it means for you to have your family working with you day to day in the church.
Yes, of course, my wife and I started the church together. She was the music leader for many years and started our women's ministry. So Kelly played a huge part. And then John Mark and Luke, they were 5 and 3 at the time we started the church. John Mark is now our SBD director and our worship leader, and he's been with us for 10 years. And then my son Luke works for Promise Keepers. Promise Keepers is back on the move, so you'll have to check it out. He's one on staff there. And then Promise Keepers is a men's ministry in case some of the viewers don't have seen that. And then my daughter just had triplets 3 years ago. They're 3 years old this year. So she's really covered up with 4 kids and doing a wonderful job there. But her family also attends our church. So it is wonderful to be a part of a family that's serving God together. And what I've noticed is when we do it together and serve together, it just brings your whole family closer together too.
So that's is a great segue into, because I wanted to actually get into more of the fatherhood discussion here, and great theological discussion up front here. But you talk about doing it together, right? And this is something we talk about for dads to really take the ownership of uniting your family under kind of like this longer, bigger vision, right? This distant destination. It's kind of your job to be driving things in that direction, right? So it may not only be with church, right? It's in all things, we should be setting these kind of objectives for everyone to be working towards. So, what have you found through your experience as a father, and, obviously being very successful, not just growing your family, but also your flock, that has worked really well to kind of unifying people behind kind of that bigger vision, because that creates those tighter bonds and relationship that is really where legacy is truly built, is within those relationships of our family. So I'd love for your input on that, because I think a lot of dads are kind of looking for, well, I want to, but I don't even know where to start.
Well, I just love seeing families in our church serving together. So we'll have greeters that are sitting there with father and son, mother, daughter. I love when families go on mission trips together. We call them impact trips. I've seen tremendous things happen when you go serve the less fortunate together, whether it's in locally or globally. So those are the things I've seen. If you're telling me, Mark, where have you seen families that 20 years ago have really grown strong? They're serving, and they're really going on mission trips together and things like that, where they're actually putting their faith into action.
Yeah, that was good, kind of from the church perspective too, but then maybe more of just maybe outside the church too, with dads on, you obviously need to set that heading for the family, right? And it's your job to kind of drive things forward. So not just within a service perspective, but, have you done anything, kind of like family meetings or that kind of stuff to kind of be getting the pulse of your family and then ensuring that you're actually able to guide them moving forward? Like, can you talk a little bit about that element of it too, outside the church and more in the home?
Well, one of the things early on, I realized I needed to make a connection with my boys, particularly. And so we would obviously play sports together, but we took scuba diving lessons together so that we could kind of have a common bond, and we would do that together. But I do think the parents I've noticed that are doing it well are planning these. They're very, very intentional about, like you said, planning family meetings, or maybe even a vacation or a retreat together that's more spiritual oriented, where they talk about these things on a retreat together. But planning it out, as we all know, if you don't plan it out and your attention about it, it's just not going to happen. So I really would encourage you to read some books on how to do that well, as far as planning special weekends or retreats where you can talk about God and talk about life together. I think that's an excellent point.
Yeah, and just quick little advice for all the dads out there too. There's a great idea of, especially if you have multiple kids, you just make a daddy calendar, right? And so each child, you pick a time that they're going to get like that one-on-one time with you. Especially when they get older and they got events in 7 different directions, and you're picking them up here and dropping them off there. It can get hectic, but that's a good way to kind of ensure that you hold yourself accountable to at least some good quality time where you can get it in, and that you're spreading it around evenly. And of course, don't forget your wife. She needs a lot of that time too, and she should actually come first. So great points, Mark. Thank you for that. I think Brandon actually has a question for you next.
Yeah, Pastor Mark. So what's the hardest part about being a father that you think is seldom discussed?
I think for guys, we have a hard time being vulnerable. or maybe even owning our own mistakes. So if you're asking me, probably I would have done a better job if I could go back and showing not just my strength, which was there through the years, but also just being more vulnerable with some of my struggles with my boys so that they can see, hey, dad's not perfect and he struggles too. So then when they started struggling, they would understand, hey, this is part of life too. It's okay to be a Christian that struggles as long as you're honest with God with it, you know? So I would be more vulnerable. And I think, guys, we have a hard time with that. But it just opens up the door with your kids when you're transparent and vulnerable about the things you can be, transparent about.
So, with that being said, what ways do you perceive God the Father now that you've had a journey of fatherhood yourself?
Well, obviously, my kids have had their struggles as well as, any other kids. And I've seen the grace-oriented part of the Father being so patient and grace-oriented towards me. And now that I've experienced that as a father who was disappointed at times in my kids and all those kind of things, I've learned how much God's given me grace and how He's been patient with me too. That's probably the biggest lesson I've learned.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to see, like, when I'm giving my children grace, it's like, oh, this must be how God feels, when I'm making mistakes, but he's like, all right, Brandon, I'm gonna give you a little slack here, that mercy that I don't deserve. So it's always an interesting thing to see how fatherhood for ourselves kind of brings that perspective back to God the Father.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question as well. So there's somebody that I kind of watched spiraled out of control, and then they have probably one of the best redemptive stories I've ever seen, and probably we will see in our lifetime. Russell Brand was way down the rabbit hole of alcoholism, drugs, all kind of stuff, and now he is a devout Christian. He has turned the page and done a complete 180 on his life. And it was such a cool thing to see and just to watch how he speaks about God and his relationship and how it's changed him is so wonderful. So my question to you is, do you have a story like that maybe someone you got to be a part of that since you've been a pastor for so long? Or is there anything that you've heard of that was similar to that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's one of the best things about our church is that we truly are a place of grace where Christ changes lives. So we have all kinds of stories. And you're right, we can't give up on anybody. But one of the most powerful stories is my story of my son Luke. And I like to let him tell his own story. But he grew up in the church, loved God from a very early age. But when he got in college, he went through some wayward years and started messing around with alcohol and some things, some bad habits that he knows we didn't really honor in our family. And then he went through a divorce early in his young life, and it took him back to the alcohol, which took over his life. So God had to redeem him out of that environment, and He did. And because of that, now he's a more powerful minister in Promise Keepers because he can identify with so many other guys he's ministering to say, "Hey, I was a wayward person. I know what that's like to get grace, and now I'm willing to give it to other people." So my son Luke would be one of the most powerful stories I've seen in our church.
Yeah, that is very powerful. And I have a quick just follow up to that one. As a father, when your child is going through a hard time like that, holding boundaries, especially if there's any kind of substance abuse or addiction, is extremely difficult. And I think a lot of well-meaning parents end up actually enabling their children further. What would just be your encouragement and advice for parents kind of who find themselves in a similar situation where you need to be holding kind of a little bit of the tough love, the boundary further for their own good, understanding that that is loving them and enabling is actually not. It's extending
Yes.
their suffering, right? So just any quick little advice you'd have for that and encouragement for anyone dealing with a similar situation there, because I know that our society in general is really bad about holding boundaries.
Well, I think personally in my story, what I would do differently is that he was in Tampa. We were here in Melbourne, which is about 2 hours away. We knew some things weren't right. We could just sense it, but I should have gone over there more and just said, "Hey, Luke, why don't you move back to Melbourne, or why don't you get closer to us so we can support you and love you through this because you're having a difficult time." And I didn't do that until it was too late. We finally did that, but it was too. I guess you could say it was down the road where we would have probably spared him more. So I would just say when you start noticing your kids going through some difficulty, don't let them just, whether they're 2 hours away or a country away, do something to get inside their life so that you can help them through it and don't just let them, to keep wandering down the road.
Yeah, with how you just described that, there a book comes to mind that we've referenced multiple times by Dr. Meg Meeker in the book Hero, and she talks about that. It's like, you're the dad, just go get your kid. They're going to be pissed at you, endure it, because you're going to spare them from something real bad. And she just gives multiple examples of where dads step in and they really save the day, and then other examples of where, kind of how you described, you kind of sensed something was going on, but you didn't want to disrupt it or whatever, and then it led to worse things. So thank you for sharing that and for being vulnerable with your family's experience, and I think that will help a lot of people. So appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Love that. So Christmas is also known for a time of miracles and things that are extraordinary. And I just was curious, is there like a crazy story or instance that you've had as a pastor that you've got to be witness to? Similar to the other question, but like something like miracle-ish that you were like blown away by, that you just think you have to share, that's like super cool.
Oh, wow. I mean, that's a tough one just because, I have experienced a lot of them, but I didn't really think about it ahead of time. You may have to give me a moment to think about that one. What would be a
Sure.
good one to
We
share
can come
there?
back to that one. Yeah,
Yeah.
not a big deal.
If you don't mind my sharing, it happened recently. So my daughter arrived 2 months early. It was a really scary birth. And when I ran into the emergency C-section, the nurse at the desk was a lady named Joanne, about 80 years old, had no business still being a nurse, just really loved kids. And my grandmother's name is Joanne, and she would be about 80. She died about 10 years ago. This woman looks exactly like my grandmother, has the same very distinct Western Michigan accent. And I looked at her and I said, "Do I know you?" And she said, "No." And I said, "You look exactly like my grandmother. This is really strange." She said, "I've heard that before." It very much felt like a guardian angel was with us. And when my son was born, it was also kind of a scary birth. My wife, we've had 2 children. They're beautiful, but we're done. That's 2 very hard births. That was enough. We've tempted fate a little bit enough. But I didn't have that fear and that anxiety when my daughter was born, because I knew that God was with us and I knew that he was protecting us. It was the most incredible feeling to go through something that should have been absolutely traumatic given everything that happened. But I was able to lead from a sense of calm because God was with me. And it was just the most incredible. It was a miracle. That's the only way that I can describe it. So it was just, and this was just 2 months ago. So it's really, really beautiful.
Love that story. Yeah, the two that came to my mind were family oriented. So when you said a church member, I was trying to think of a church member, but I'm going to go ahead and share. I was in a plane crash on the Christmas holiday when I was 20 years old. So that's one that will always stand in my mind, that God saved us from a plane crash. But the one I was going to share was my daughter, who was pregnant with triplets, and she was having some difficulty. So we knew the boys, they're identical boys, that they could come early. And so it's the Christmas holidays and it's coming soon. And all of a sudden I get this phone call like a day or so before Christmas, that she was getting ready to deliver in a couple of days, and she had COVID. She got COVID. And I can remember my heart just sunk, thinking, is she going to be able to survive this, having COVID and having to deliver triplets? And are the boys going to be okay? And all that kind of stuff. Well, she did deliver on December 28th, those boys with COVID, and everything went great. And of course, they were healthy and were preemies for a while. But other than that, so that's a Christmas miracle for me. I will always remember how God saved those boys and saved her life.
Praise God. Amen. And that's cool. You have triple Christmas babies now. So speaking of Christmas, it is Christmas Day. The presents are all ripped up. Everyone's probably eating their giant Christmas meal now and falling asleep listening to this. But what is your favorite family Christmas tradition that you've done in your family?
Well, again, we're all musical. All my kids, we wanted to make sure they had musical lessons when they were growing up. And my wife has a beautiful voice. And I used to sing in choir. That's how I met my wife. So we all are musical. So one of my favorite traditions is when we get together, John Mark plays guitar, and we're just sitting around singing songs, praising God together, praying together, worshiping together. Those are my favorite memories of all.
So obviously Christmas is a time when we all get together and not just have music, but we have movies. One of my favorites is Die Hard 1 and 2. I know it's so cliche, but it's the greatest. I love it. And then obviously Lampoon's, Christmas Vacation and some of the others. But what is your favorite like Christmas movies that you watch traditionally with your family?
Well, Home Alone was always one of our favorites. Keep the change, you filthy animal.
Yeah. There
Just
was a certain
laugh.
appearance by somebody.
Yeah. So that was one of my favorites. Of course, Christmas Vacation was probably number two.
I'm a little
Nice.
disappointed that you didn't say A Muppet's Christmas Carol because that's unequivocally the best Christmas movie of all time. But I'll just leave that out there. Brandon, what did you had? It's a Wonderful Life. Is that your contribution to this? All right, Dustin, what about you? Everyone else is fired off.
I was just going to say Muppets Christmas Carol. We just watched it a couple days ago. My son saw it for the first time, and he absolutely loved it. He was entranced. So great choice there, George.
The opening song and then the Marley Brothers song are just like peak.
I would say A Christmas Story
Christmas.
too, though. Like, you're going to put your eye out, kid, that kind of thing. So that's always a good one. And then The Grinch.
Hot take here. I think that's the worst Christmas movie of all time, actually. Yep.
Oh,
I
man.
hate it. Never enjoyed that movie, not once. I think it's
I
boring.
oh man, I thought for sure Dustin was gonna throw in his turbo time, and do a little Arnold.
Dustin, you need to stand up real quick. We need to get a zoom in on the cutoff sweater here. Yeah, there we go. Look at that. Well done. Well done. That is definitely the ugliest of the Christmas sweaters that we have right now. Well done. All right, Mark, sorry we were getting sidetracked there, but what is your favorite Christmas just event that's happened? Like, not necessarily miracle, but just maybe it was a family trip, maybe it was kind of this great memory. What was your best one?
Well, I grew up in a big family, so we just loved getting together. We'd always gather at my parents' house or Kelly's parents' houses and just get the whole family together. But one of my favorite Christmases, I was in seminary. Kelly and I had just married, so it was our first Christmas together as a married couple. We're driving from Fort Worth, where we went to Southwestern Seminary, back to Tennessee, and we had an ice storm in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And I was just determined I'm going to go through it. So we got out on the road, and there's cars all on the side of the road. I mean, there's no way we should have been out there. But I was trudging on, and we got to the other side of Dallas after about 3 or 4 hours, and they shut the interstate down. And so we're in a truck stop, and we're going to probably be there for days, it seems like. And I'm just like, this is how we're going to spend Christmas. We can't get home. And so we called Kelly's parents, and they knew somebody who lived a mile away from that truck stop. So we were able to drive to their house to stay for the night, and then the next day we were able to get to the airport and fly off. So that was always one of my favorite memories. It's just that God provided someone a mile away from the truck stop that we could stay the night.
Too bad it
That's
wasn't
so
John
cool.
Candy in an old van.
Oh, that's amazing though. That it's just we call them coincidences, but you have to wonder, right? Maybe there's those little things that happen all the time. It's just beautiful.
I call
Brandon,
them God winks. That's what I call
Yeah.
them, God winks.
God winks. I like that. I'm gonna take that and use that. That's good. All right, we're gonna transition now a little bit to kind of our typical fatherhood questions, and we'll kick that one off with, if there was a piece of advice. Think back to you're expecting your firstborn. You today is able to tell that guy all those years ago one piece of advice about being a dad. What would it be?
I think, again, I was very sports oriented growing up. Played 3 sports, and sports was a big part of my life. But one of the biggest pieces of advice I would give is just find what your child is passionate about and find where their sweet spot is, and don't push on your own dreams on them. Let them find and discover their own dreams, and then really cultivate and water that. Because I think early on I probably was too big on pushing sports when maybe that wasn't their thing.
Yeah. I'm it's interesting. My son is 4 and he has no interest in organized sports at all. And that may change as he gets older, but it's just crushing me because sports are my life. And so if he's not interested in that, I'll still love him and we'll have this great relationship. But it's very important that I don't make him feel that he's less than because he doesn't love sports as much as I do. So that's a message to me personally to remind myself that it's not about me, it's about him for sure. So Mark, can you think back to a core memory, to a really special moment that you've had with one of your children that you'll never forget, a good story that you can share with us?
Well, like I said, I'm an adventurer, so one of the things I've always tried to do with my children is take adventures with them. And we took this family vacation one year out west where we went to the Arches of National Park. We went to hiking, camping, Colorado. It was like a 10-day trip. And they still today will say that was one of their favorite vacations together because we did things together, adventures together, and the camping and all those things, just kind of bring you closer together. I would do more of those things if I could go back, but
That's
that
awesome.
definitely was a highlight.
I talk about that a lot of kind of trying to make micro trips, right? Because we can't just afford to go on big vacations. Most of us can't just go on vacations whenever we want to. And we've really tried hard to do little, weekend little getaways and things like that where it doesn't cost a lot of money. And, like you were just saying, they still remember that. We've had a few already. My daughter's only 9, but we still just reminisce about these little trips. So I love that advice for the dads out there. And again, it ties back to that intentionality, right? You got to be the one to kind of get the logistics set and figure it out and, budget the money for it. And those investments in your family, I think, is what creates real legacy, right? So just beautiful. Love that, man. Brandon, you got anything?
Yeah,
No?
sorry, my
Okay.
microphone there
There we
was
go. Mute
sort
Goblin got him.
yeah,
The
yeah, yeah.
Christmas mute elf got you.
So one of the things, obviously, that every father has to deal with is discipline. Discipling our children is a really important thing, and then not just that, but maintaining connection, whether it's right after discipline. So, what advice would you give fathers? Like, what does healing look like when it comes to like a father-child relationship in your eyes?
Again, I just think we have to go there and be honest. And again, it's probably how you discipline. We all know we need to do it. You do it with love, but you do it with firmness, and that correction is needed. But I think they'll respect you more down the road when you do it. If you don't do it, parents think, oh, they're going to love me if I don't, call them on that. No, I think they're going to respect you more if you do it. So I think back to my own dad. We had a rule in our home that if you got a whipping at school, you're getting a whipping at home. I don't know if you guys had that rule. And so, sure enough, there was a time when the seventh grade teacher wouldn't let me go to my locker in between classes, and I went anyway, and she caught me, and she gave me a whooping with a paddle. And so I told my dad when I got home, and he said, "Okay, meet me up in the attic." I don't know why it was the attic, but oh no, we're going to the attic. And he gave me a whipping. And but as I look back on that, I respected my dad because he had boundaries. He was doing it for my good, and I'm glad he had the courage to do that because I didn't get in trouble again at school.
Yeah, Matthew McConaughey wrote a book, Green Lights, where his dad believes in outlaw logic. So if he did something but didn't get caught, it was fine. But if he did get caught, he was going to be in a lot of trouble. So I always thought that was I
I
wouldn't
love it.
recommend it, but it was just a funny way to do things. So things are a lot different for dads today than they were even 10 or 20 years ago. Can you think of some challenges that dads have today that maybe you didn't have when you were raising your children? And what a modern dad with younger children today might take from someone like yourself with some wisdom, what we can learn from you about being a great dad.
Well, that's probably a two-part question. And Dustin, I would also love to hear your Matthew McConaughey impression if you got one. But anyway, um, number one, obviously, I think we all know social media and having cell phones has changed the game for a lot of parents, and I didn't have to deal with that as much as raising my kids, and so I really am sympathetic for the parents today who have to set those boundaries and figure out how to maneuver through that. And I know there's some great books out there that talk about how to do that, but to me, that's one thing I didn't ever have to face. That's a great challenge, I think, because I do think the social media is I'm seeing more teenagers depressed and envious of others than ever before. So it's definitely affecting their psyche. Again, I just think that I hope that guys like me who've been down the road would try to pour into other young guys and help them through fatherhood because we have been through there. So about 4 years ago, I've been leading small groups all my life, but I had been mentoring men two by two. And God just laid on my heart that I need to do more of that. So for the last 4 years since COVID, I've been taking two guys, young guys, and we spend 1 hour a week and we go for a whole year and just mentoring them, encouraging them. And I think more of that needs to happen between mature men, older men like me, and younger guys. And I think we all will benefit from that.
Yeah, I really love that you just brought that up, because I think that that's sorely lacking in the church and in just regular American society for sure. But we should be experts at it in the church, quite frankly. I mean, we're commanded to do it, so it's actually pretty sad that we haven't done a better job collectively. But I have too been seeing that just from my point of view, right, in the world I'm living in, and I'm a generation behind you, or close to it, and I've seen that as soon as you get through the initial awkwardness, guys don't care how old someone is. They're all, because we understand the value that's provided from the younger guy, from the older guy, from the dudes in the same season of life as us. It doesn't have to be like segmented by age groups, or he's a student and I'm a professional, and it honestly breaks down really fast from my perspective, at least what I've seen. And so do you have any follow-up to that, for just how kind of like the average guy listening to this can maybe start to foster a little bit of like a dad group or a friend group or something like that, to ensure that like 2x2 model you were just describing can actually foster, you don't have to be a pastor to do this. You can just go and do it yourself.
Absolutely. I mean, you think about it. I mean, just in the last 100 years is where it's changed, because before that, I think generations were spending time together on the farm or doing things together, whereas our generation is the one that's more fragmented. So I think we have to be more intentional. So I'm always encouraging people, find your Paul, find your Barnabas, find your Timothy. Your Barnabas is your peer that you're working together, you're encouraging each other, you're helping each other. Your Paul is somebody you look to mentor you, and your Timothy is somebody you're mentoring. And we can all do that no matter what stage we are. And so you have to be intentional about finding those people.
Yeah, I did Big Brothers for a number of years, and I was able to mentor a 10-year-old boy. It was one of the best experiences of my life. And it's interesting, Big Sisters, there's a waiting list of women willing to help. And then Big Brothers, it's the opposite. There's a waiting list of boys who need men to help. And for some reason, men have just abdicated that. I don't know if it's fear of, I don't want people to think I look weird because I'm hanging out with a 10-year-old, or if it's just we'd rather play video games, or what it is. Why do you think it is that men of our generation have stopped mentoring? What do you think that's stopping that?
Again, I just think they haven't been mentored themselves. So we're just going to have to break the chain, and in the churches, that's where it's going to start, where we get these programs together, we talk about it, we challenge, we encourage, because it's intimidating. Most guys don't know how to do it. But again, as someone mentioned, it's just as easy as just meeting together and praying together and talking through things together. That's it. And we do that an hour a week, and I'm telling you, the guys, they love it. They need it, and they want it. So just do it, But we've got to do a better job as a church of training people how to do it.
Devil's advocate on the stat you played, Dustin, I think it's also because a lot of men have their own families that they're busy providing for and things. So, they have, on average, less free time to contribute to something like that. But I do agree with you that there is probably a lack of willingness that's also played into it. So just kind of want to throw that out there and not be totally one-dimensional.
Sure. But there are ways to get around that too. Like, one of the things that our small group does when we don't have time to meet during a certain week, or there's somebody's got to work a night shift or something, is we just all go out to lunch, and we get to, prepare and focus and read a specific Bible verse, and then we just discuss it over lunch. And, there's plenty of ways to adapt a small group. And like, it doesn't take much. You can say, if you don't know somebody very well, say, hey, listen, I'm looking for other group of men. Love what you do, man. Love to have lunch with you sometime. And man, that opens the door right there. And then all you got to do is just show up to lunch. And so that's what I would encourage men, is just make that leap of faith and see what happens.
So Mark, for those of our listeners who are not in the Melbourne area, how can they reach out and be a part of Church of Viera if they really like what they've seen here? Is there online opportunities for people to learn about the programs at Church of Viera?
We always encourage people to find a local church, obviously, because you have those connections, you have those people. But certainly, we live in a wonderful time when you can observe church services online, and we do that, every week ourselves. Matter of fact, I'll be honest, we've been talking about doing a podcast, and you guys inviting me on to do this. We're going to start launching our own podcast our staff. So you guys have been an inspiration for us, and people can join in on that too.
I know
There's
a
your
couple of guys
Christmas
who'd be
gift.
good guests.
See, we got you a Christmas gift. Here you go. See, we didn't come empty.
Maybe you three. No, I'm just kidding.
Love to hear it.
I'm a blundering idiot tonight.
I think there needs to be more actually from like a theological perspective, right? To answer those questions, like some of the ones I asked you about. Oh, well, how could a loving God let that happen? I think putting that stuff out there, and then you can point people to it, right? It's kind of this evergreen thing. Not to be lazy, but just to help them, start a journey. You can make a little, series or whatever, kind of like sermons and everything. And yeah, that'd be awesome. So, I wanted to ask you one last thing before we wrap for the Christmas evening here, as we all get back to our families. Do you just have any, Christmas message you want to share with everyone as we close down 24 and head into 2025?
Well, guys, I don't know where you guys believe on this, so I'll just throw it out there. I think the time is short. I think we're living in the last days, and I don't think we have that many Christmases left. But even if we had 10 or 20, it would be few. So I think we just got to make the most of the years ahead with our families, and we've got to be that shining light in a dark world, because we've all seen in the last years that light is needed more than ever before. So let's shine the light. Let's be loving. Let's be encouraging, because I believe time is short.
That's beautiful, man. And yeah, we talk about a lot being a man of action, and that's exactly what you're describing there, is take action and make it count and make that impact, right? So thank you so much for sharing all of your experience and wisdom with us tonight. Is there any place other than your church that people could connect to you or follow you? I'm not sure if you are on social media, but if you are, where would that be, and where should people look you up?
I don't have a strong presence on social media, so really the Church at Viera is a great place to start if they wanted to. Like you mentioned a series. We have a series on the tough questions of life, so they could view that. That would be a great place to start if they wanted to check it out.
Perfect. We will put that link right here on your screen, and it's in the description as well. So, Mark, thank you so much. Again, Merry Christmas to you. Merry Christmas to everyone. Merry Christmas, dads. Let's get climbing that mountain of fatherhood together. Go have a wonderful season with your family, and we will see you in the next episode.
Merry Christmas.
Thanks for watching this episode of the podcast. If you're on YouTube, drop a subscription to us, and if you are listening on Apple or Spotify, please leave us a review. It helps greatly. If you are also ready to level up as a man, check out Elite Sentinel Coaching, our program designed specifically for men, where we forge men into leaders. We turn cowards into kings, weaklings into warriors. Become the hero in your story. Join us today.